In this video, we're going to look at mathematical logical problems. Such problems often appear as puzzle questions and for an untrained eye might look very confusing without clear ways of approach. They are very different from standard math problems. We will show that is not necessarily the case. There are standard ways to handle most of such problems. So first, let us focus on problems which can be solved by assumption and making contradictions. The basic approach is the following. Assume one of the conditions or one of the statements in the problem is correct, and then using the other conditions and the assumption to further derive statements. And then you continue doing that until you see a contradiction, or there's no contradiction. In that case, you solve the problem. So let's look at the first problem. In here, the problem states, in a national geography class, the teacher showed 5 blocks representing the shape of a distinct state in the United States and asked students to name them. Student A said, Block 2 is Alabama, 5 is Maine. Student B said, Block 2 is California, 4 is Delaware. Student C said, Block 1 is Delaware, 5 is New York. Student D said, Block 3 is California, 4 is New York. Student E said, Block 2 is Maine, 3 is Alabama. Now it turns out every student got one and only one state correct. And this is the key. It means that for every student who made really 2 statements about one block and the other block, right? Only got one block correct and the other block wrong. Now, based on that condition, what is the corresponding state for each block? For such problems, it's very useful to make a table representing the correspondence between the block and the state, and using that to track the statements. Alright, let's just do that. So let's name the blocks in the rows as block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the states are Alabama, California, Delaware, Maine, and New York. It is a table, so let's make the rows and columns. So Alabama, California, Delaware, Maine, and each row representing a block and each column representing that state. And we try to make this one-to-one correspondence between the block ID with the state. And if it's corresponding to, we're going to make a check sign. And for that, we know that every block corresponding to one state, so there will be one check in every row and one check on every column. Okay, and we're going to making assumptions about start with anyone really, but we can start with student A said one statement is correct and the other statement is wrong. So for student A, there are only really 2 cases. First case is block 2 is Alabama and 5 is not Maine. Second case, this is case 1. Case 2 is 2 is not A, 5 is Maine. Let's look at case 1. When 2 is A, block 2 is A, let's make this thing, 2 is A, and 5 is not Maine. We can, of course, make a cross sign there, saying that 5 is not Maine, but we actually don't need that. let's see. If A said block 2 is Alabama is correct, then what B said, block 2 is California, is definitely not correct. So 4 is Delaware. It must be correct because B also get one state correct. And actually, if we just focus on, instead of C and D, let's just focus on E said. Block 2 is Maine and 3 is Alabama. Because block 2 is Alabama, as we assumed, so block 2 is not Maine, right? So that means 3 is Alabama must be correct. So 3 is also Alabama. But that's wrong. Now for both block 2 is Alabama, block 3 is Alabama is correct. That's a contradiction. So the case 1 is not right. So now let's look at case 2. 5 is Maine and 2 is not A. So 5 is Maine. So let's clean out the table and see how we derive, if we will derive any contradictions or if every condition will be met. So let's clean out the table now. Okay, so in here we assume 2 is not A, 5 is Maine is correct. So 5 is Maine in here. Now, because 5 is Maine, so if you look at anything that related to about 5, in student C set, block 1 is Delaware, 5 is New York. So this part cannot be correct, right? So which means this has to be right. Block 1 is Delaware. All right? Because 1 is Delaware, student B, 4 is Delaware, cannot be correct anymore. So 2 is California. 2 is California. So we used student B set, student C set. Okay, now look at D set. Block 3 is California. It cannot be correct because 2 is California. This is incorrect. So 4 is New York must be correct. 4 is New York. And block 2 is Maine. 3 is Alabama. Okay, we already said block 2 is California, so this part is not correct. 3 is Alabama is correct. So we used all the statements. In student A set, we assume 5 is Maine, and this part is wrong. So we see all the conditions are met, and everything is consistent. So this is the solution. To recap a little bit, in these kind of problems, you basically start with one of the statements, assuming that is true. Actually, in this problem, there are two cases. The first part of the statement of A is true, or the second part of the statement from A is true. And from there, you derive, coupled with the other conditions, derive further conclusions. And if all the conclusions are consistent, you arrive a solution. Otherwise, at a certain point, you will meet a contradiction, and that contradiction's making the first assumption wrong, and you can rule out that assumption. And also, in this kind of problems, have a table, for example, on the right, to keep track of what is correct and what is wrong. It's very, very handy and very useful. And that's the first problem of this video.